Aaliyah Todd had been invisible for so long, she'd forgotten what her own voice sounded like when it carried weight. But how does someone learn their own name again, after years of being called nothing? And what happens when the most powerful man in England insists on teaching her? Hello, lovely souls. Before we begin Aaliyah's journey from nonentity to Duchess, I have a heartfelt request. If this story of a woman raised by a cruel stepmother to believe she was nothing, until England's most desired duke said otherwise, touches your heart, would you bless me with a like and subscribe to the Duchess's secret? Your support helps me bring you more tales of resilience, love, and triumph. And please, do tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Each message brings the most wonderful smile to my face. Victorian England, 1842. In the candlelit sewing room of Thornfield Manor, where shadows pooled in forgotten corners and time seemed suspended in amber stillness, Aaliyah Todd's needle moved with practiced precision through silk that cost more than she'd eaten in a month. The fabric whispered beneath her scarred fingers, 1,000 needle pricks, burns from hot irons, stains from dyes that never quite washed away. At 20 years old, she had perfected the art of disappearing. The embroidery taking shape beneath her hands was exquisite. Delicate roses intertwined with ivy, each petal rendered with such emotional depth that the flowers seemed to breathe. Hidden in the corner, so small one had to search for it, were 2 letters worked into the design with thread barely darker than the background. A.T., her signature, her only act of defiance. Her secret proof that she existed. Aaliyah's hollow cheeks caught the candlelight as she leaned closer to her work. Her dark hair pulled back so severely it made her head ache. Her simple gray dress hung on a frame that suggested insufficient meals, and her hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from 18 hours of uninterrupted labor. She paused, flexing her fingers to ease the cramping, and caught her reflection in the darkened window. For a moment, she didn't recognize herself. When had she become this hollow creature? When had her hazel eyes developed that haunted look? She knew the answer. 6 years ago, the day her father died. The memory struck with the force it always did. Her father's study, the smell of pipe tobacco and old books, his gentle hands showing her how to sketch design patterns. "You have your mother's gift, Aaliyah," he'd said, his voice warm with pride. "Never forget that. Never let anyone convince you that beauty is frivolous, or that your talent is anything less than extraordinary." 3 days later, the fever took him, and with him went the last person who believed Aaliyah Todd was something rather than nothing. Lady Laura Brooks had moved swiftly after the funeral. Aaliyah's mother's portrait was burned, her jewelry sold. The 14-year-old girl was relocated from her bedchamber to the servants' quarters, and the systematic erasure began. "You are a non-entity." The words had been repeated so often in so many variations that they had carved themselves into Aaliyah's bones. "Your existence is a burden your father left me to bear. The only value you possess is in what your hands can produce, and even that is barely adequate." 6 years of that voice, 6 years of those words, until Aaliyah believed them with the certainty of scripture. The door opened without warning. Laura never knocked. Why would she? Non-entities didn't deserve the courtesy of announcement. "Still working, I see," the voice cut through the quiet like a whip crack. "At least you're useful for something." Lady Laura Brooks stood in the doorway, elegant in her evening dress of deep burgundy silk. Silk Aaliyah had embroidered with golden thread just last week. At 43, Laura maintained her striking appearance through rigid discipline and fashionable gowns. Her dark hair was arranged in an elaborate updo, her posture perfect, her expression holding the kind of beauty that came from knowing one's own power. She swept into the room, examining the embroidery with critical eyes. Her fingers traced the roses, searching for imperfection. "Barely adequate," she said finally, though Aaliyah could see the piece was flawless. "You'll need to redo this section here. The shading is inconsistent." "Yes, Lady Brooks." Aaliyah's voice emerged as barely a whisper, rusty from disuse. "Speak up. You sound like a mouse." "Yes, Lady Brooks," Aaliyah repeated, only marginally louder. Laura moved closer, her perfume, expensive French scent, overwhelming in the small room. "I came to inform you that the Duke of Warpstow arrives tomorrow. He's commissioning a complete trousseau for his sister's wedding to a French viscount." Aaliyah's needle stilled. The Duke of Warpstow. England's most eligible bachelor, whose taste and patronage could make or break a designer's reputation. "This is the opportunity we've been waiting for," Laura continued, her voice warming with anticipation. "If we secure this commission, Charlotte's future is assured. Her marriage prospects will be extraordinary." Charlotte, Laura's daughter, 19 and beautiful in the precise way society valued, the daughter who would be presented as the creative genius behind every piece Aaliyah created. "You will remain in this room while the Duke is here," Laura said, each word sharp and clear. "You will not be seen. You will not be heard. Non-entities don't meet dukes, Aaliyah. Do you understand?" "Yes, Lady Brooks." "Your only purpose is to produce work that I can present as my own, as Charlotte's own. You exist to serve those better than you. That is the truth I've tried to teach you for 6 years. Have you learned it yet?" Aaliyah's throat tightened. "Yes, Lady Brooks." "Good." Laura smoothed her dress, preparing to leave for her society function. "I expect that piece finished by morning. And, Aaliyah—" She paused in the doorway, her profile sharp against the candlelight. "Try not to be quite so pathetic. Your worthlessness is exhausting even to witness." The door closed. Aaliyah sat frozen, the words settling over her like a familiar shroud. "You are a non-entity. You are nothing. You are worthless. 6 years of this. 6 years of believing it. It was easier, wasn't it? Easier to accept what she was told than to fight against the constant crushing weight of Laura's certainty." But as Aaliyah returned to her embroidery, her needle moving through silk with muscle memory born of endless practice, a small, dangerous thought whispered through her mind. "What if I'm not nothing?" She crushed it immediately. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment, and disappointment led to punishment. Better to be nothing, safer to disappear. After an hour, when she was certain Laura wouldn't return, Aaliyah pulled out a scrap of fabric from the pile destined for the fire. Her hands moved almost of their own accord, creating a tiny scene she hadn't planned, a bird in a gilded cage. The door was slightly ajar, not quite open enough for escape, but the possibility existed there, rendered in threads so fine it was almost invisible. She studied it for a long moment, then tucked it away with the others hidden beneath a loose floorboard, her secret gallery of dreams, stories, and forbidden hope. Dozens of scraps, each one a tiny rebellion against the nothing Laura insisted she was. Tomorrow the Duke would arrive. Tomorrow Charlotte would accept praise for Aaliyah's genius. Tomorrow everything would remain exactly as it had been for 6 years. Laura claiming the credit, Charlotte performing the role, and Aaliyah hidden away like something shameful. Unless something changed. unless someone saw past the performance to the truth beneath, unless the Duke of Warbstow proved to be different from every other person who'd looked at Laura's work and never thought to ask who actually created it. But Aaliyah Todd, who had been nothing for so long, didn't dare believe in unless. She bent her head back to her work, needle moving through silk in the dim candlelight, creating beauty she would never be credited for, pouring her soul into art that would bear someone else's name. The candle burned lower, the night deepened, and in the sewing room of Thornfield Manor, a young woman who'd forgotten her own worth stitched dreams she didn't dare claim, signed them with initials no one noticed, and prepared for tomorrow, when everything would stay exactly the same, unless it didn't. When Aaliyah entered the drawing room, Henry's breath caught. She was extraordinarily thin, her simple gray dress hanging on a frame that suggested months, perhaps years, of insufficient food. Her dark hair was pulled back so severely it emphasized the hollow quality of her cheeks, the shadows beneath her eyes. But it was her hands that arrested him, scarred from countless needle pricks, stained with dyes that had seeped beneath the skin, trembling slightly as she kept them folded at her waist like a penitent. She wouldn't meet his eyes. She'd been trained not to. Henry rose from his seat, instinctively trying to put her at ease. "Miss Todd," Laura supplied quickly, her voice sharp. "Aaliyah Todd, my late husband's responsibility." The pause before the final word spoke volumes. "Miss Todd," Henry said gently, noting how the girl flinched at the simple courtesy of being addressed properly. "I'm Henry Barlow. I've been admiring your work. The technical execution is remarkable." Aaliyah's voice emerged as barely a whisper, rusty from disuse. "I do the stitching work for Lady Brooks, Your Grace." "The basic stitching work," Laura interjected, moving to stand beside Aaliyah in a gesture that looked protective but felt controlling. "Following designs Charlotte and I provide. Aaliyah is quite adequate at execution, but the creative vision, of course, comes from us." Henry noticed how Aaliyah made herself smaller when Laura spoke, how her shoulders curved inward as if trying to disappear into herself. He'd seen that posture before, in diplomatic negotiations, in servants who'd been mistreated, in anyone who'd learned that visibility meant punishment. "I see," Henry said, though he was beginning to suspect he saw far more than Laura intended. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, fine linen, plain except for an embroidered corner. "Miss Todd, would you do me the honor of creating something? Any design you choose. I'd like to observe your technical skill firsthand." Aaliyah looked to Laura, asking permission without words. The dynamic was clear, completely controlled, utterly dependent. Laura's smile was tight but confident. "Of course, Your Grace. Though I assure you, what you'll see is merely competent execution. Aaliyah, fetch your materials." What happened over the next hour transfixed everyone in the room, though each for different reasons. Aaliyah settled in the corner with needle, thread, and the handkerchief, her hands moving with the kind of certainty that spoke of countless hours of practice. Henry, Catherine, Laura, and Charlotte took tea, maintaining polite conversation, but Henry's attention kept drifting to the young woman working in the corner. She'd gone completely still except for her hands. Her breathing had changed, deeper, calmer, as if the act of creation allowed her to exist more fully than normal interaction did. The trembling had stopped. Her posture, while still curved protectively, held a quiet intensity. An hour passed. The afternoon light shifted, casting gold across the room. "I believe I'm finished, Your Grace," Aaliyah whispered. Henry crossed to her immediately, and what he saw made his heart stop. The embroidery showed a hunting scene, but subverted entirely. A fox escaped through an impossible gap in the hedge, its expression not fearful but determined. The hounds milled in confusion, their formation broken. The hunters, visible in the background, gestured in frustration at their quarry's escape. It was a story of the overlooked, the underestimated, the invisible creature that survived through being perpetually unseen. The technical mastery was breathtaking, each thread placed with precision, the shading complex and sophisticated. But it was the emotional narrative that made Henry's chest tighten with recognition, hope embedded in impossible escape, strength hidden in apparent weakness, freedom achieved through the very invisibility meant to imprison. This wasn't adequate technical skill. This was genius. Henry knelt beside Aaliyah's chair so their eyes were level. She startled at his proximity but didn't pull away. "This is extraordinary," he said quietly. "Who taught you to tell stories like this?" "No one, Your Grace." Confusion flickered across her hollow face. "I just stitch what I see in my mind." "That's called artistry," Henry said, his voice gentle but firm. "That's called genius, Miss Todd." Aaliyah flinched as if he'd struck her. The word genius applied to her was incomprehensible, threatening, surely a cruel joke designed to humiliate her later. "Your Grace is too kind," Laura interjected quickly, crossing to them with Catherine following. "Aaliyah simply has some technical facility, nothing more. The design is rather simple, wouldn't you say? A basic hunting scene." "There's nothing basic about this," Catherine said, examining the embroidery with genuine admiration. "The emotional depth, the narrative complexity. Henry's right. This is extraordinary work." But Henry had stopped listening to his sister. He was watching Aaliyah's face, the flash of desperate hope that appeared for one heartbeat before trained disbelief crushed it like a candle flame. He saw how she held herself, perpetually braced for punishment. He saw the scars on her hands, too many for simple accidents. He saw the hollowness in her eyes that came from systematic starvation, both physical and spiritual. And he saw how Laura controlled her through fear, through years of conditioning that had convinced this young woman of extraordinary talent that she was nothing. Henry made his decision in that moment. "Lady Brooks," he said, rising and turning to face his hostess with ducal authority, "I find I must extend my visit. There's additional business in the area that requires my attention, and I'd like to commission several more pieces. Miss Todd's technical skill will be essential." Laura's face went rigid with calculation. She couldn't refuse without seeming inhospitable and risking the substantial commission. "Of course, Your Grace. We're honored by your continued presence." "Excellent." Henry's smile was pleasant, but his eyes held steel. "I'll want to consult with Miss Todd directly on the technical aspects. Perhaps she could show me where she works." "That won't be necessary." "I insist," Henry said mildly. "I'm quite particular about such details." He'd trapped her, and Laura knew it. She could only nod stiffly. After the Duke and his sister departed to their guest chambers, Aaliyah returned to the sewing room in a daze. His words echoed in her mind. Extraordinary, artistry, genius. She pulled out a piece of broken mirror, all she had, and studied her reflection in the dim light. She saw hollow cheeks, haunted eyes, the face of someone who'd learned to expect cruelty. She saw nothing special, nothing worthy of such words. "He's wrong," she told herself firmly. "Laura is right. I'm nothing. This is delusion. Tomorrow he'll realize his mistake and everything will return to normal." But a small, dangerous voice whispered through her exhaustion. "What if he's not wrong?" What if the AT you've been hiding for 6 years means something? What if you're not nothing? The thought terrified her more than any of Laura's punishments ever had. That night, Aaliyah dreamed of freedom, of creating without hiding her signature, of standing in sunlight instead of candlelit shadows, of being seen, truly seen, without fear. She woke gasping in the darkness, her heart hammering against her ribs, terror flooding her body. Because wanting something after 6 years of wanting nothing was the most dangerous rebellion of all. Because hope, once allowed, was almost impossible to extinguish. Because if she let herself believe she might be something, and then discovered she truly was nothing, the crushing weight of that disappointment would destroy what little remained of her. Better to stay invisible, safer to be nothing. But in her pocket, carefully folded, was the handkerchief with the embroidered fox escaping impossible odds. The Duke had insisted she keep it. A reminder, he'd said quietly, that escape is possible, even when it seems impossible. Aaliyah clutched it in the darkness and trembled with the terror of almost believing him. Henry didn't leave Thornfield Manor. He invented reasons to stay. Additional commissions for Catherine's trousseau, detailed discussions about fabric weights and thread colors, suddenly discovered business in the nearby village. Each excuse bought him more time to investigate, and Laura couldn't refuse without seeming inhospitable and risking the substantial patronage a duke could provide. But Henry's true purpose had nothing to do with embroidery, and everything to do with the young woman whose genius was being systematically stolen. He began carefully, with quiet conversations in corridors and kitchens where servants felt safer speaking truth. Mrs. Cooper, the cook, was first. Henry found her in the larder and asked casually about household arrangements. "Miss Todd," he said. "She seems quite thin. Is she unwell?" Mrs. Cooper's hands stilled on the bread she was slicing. She glanced toward the door, then said quietly, "Her ladyship says the girl needs to learn discipline, Your Grace. Miss Aaliyah receives scraps and leftovers, what we'd normally give the dogs." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Sometimes I sneak her extra bread, but if I'm caught, I'll be dismissed without references. We all would be." Henry's jaw tightened. "How long has this been happening?" "6 years, Your Grace, since her father died." The housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, confirmed worse when Henry encountered her changing linens. "Miss Aaliyah works 18 hours a day, sometimes more," she admitted, her weathered face troubled. "I hear her crying sometimes, late at night when she thinks no one can hear. But there's nothing I can do. Lady Brooks controls everything, our positions, our futures. We whisper our sympathies, but we cannot protect her." The stable boy, when questioned about the horses, revealed the most damning detail. "I've never seen Miss Aaliyah outside the manor in 6 years, Your Grace. Not once. Lady Brooks says she's too delicate for fresh air, but—" He trailed off, unwilling to speak treason against his employer. Henry's fury grew with each conversation. Each careful revelation, each piece of a picture that revealed systematic cruelty disguised as guardianship. The village solicitor proved harder to approach. Mr. Pemberton was elderly, cautious, and clearly frightened of Laura Brooks's influence. But when Henry arrived at his office and assured him of ducal protection, the man's resistance crumbled. "I've carried this guilt for 6 years," Pemberton said, pulling dusty files from a locked drawer. "Mr. Todd was my friend. He trusted me to ensure his wishes were honored." The documents he spread across the desk were devastating. Aaliyah's father had left her a substantial inheritance, enough to ensure independence, education, and a comfortable life. His will contained explicit instructions. Aaliyah was to be educated, properly cared for, and eventually launched into society. Laura was appointed guardian with clear stipulations about the girl's well-being, her artistic development, her future. "Every stipulation has been violated," Pemberton said quietly. "Every protection ignored." Lady Brooks claimed the inheritance was needed for household expenses, that Aaliyah was too delicate for education, too unstable for society. I should have challenged her, but she threatened to ruin my practice, to spread rumors that would destroy my reputation. His hands trembled. I chose my livelihood over my friend's daughter. I've regretted it every day since. Henry carefully copied the relevant passages, his anger crystallizing into cold determination. This wasn't merely cruelty. It was fraud, theft, and systematic abuse. A letter to his London contacts provided the final piece. A dress shop owner, Mrs. Harrison, responded immediately to Henry's inquiry about Lady Brooks's work. "Your Grace, I commissioned pieces from Lady Brooks for years. 6 years ago, something changed dramatically. The designs went from competent to transcendent. The embroidery suddenly told stories, evoked profound emotion. I asked what had changed, and she became defensive, evasive, claimed she'd always possessed such talent. But I knew better. I've studied textiles for 30 years. Someone new was creating those pieces. Someone extraordinary." Henry now understood completely. Laura was selling Aaliyah's genius as her own, keeping the girl isolated, starved, and convinced of her worthlessness to prevent her from realizing the truth. The lock study was a calculated risk. When Laura and Charlotte departed for the village one afternoon, Henry enlisted a sympathetic housemaid who'd witnessed Aaliyah's suffering. "Please, Your Grace," the girl whispered, unlocking the door with trembling hands. "Help her. We all see what's happening, but we're powerless to stop it." Inside a locked box, the key hidden beneath a false bottom in Laura's desk, Henry found damning evidence. Hundreds of fabric samples embroidered with Aaliyah's distinctive style, each marked with prices Laura had charged clients. Receipts showing thousands of pounds earned from work Laura claimed as her own. Letters from prestigious clients praising Lady Brooks's extraordinary talent for designs that bore Aaliyah's hidden signature. It was systematic fraud, meticulously documented by Laura's own hand. Henry's strategy shifted from investigation to intervention. He requested a private commission, a waistcoat for Catherine's wedding, embroidered with a design entirely of Aaliyah's choosing. "The work requires the finest detail," he told Laura smoothly. "Miss Todd must work in the garden, where natural light will allow proper precision." Laura agreed, confident she could supervise closely enough to maintain control. But Henry had seen Aaliyah's pale skin, her hollow cheeks. She needed sunlight and fresh air more than she needed perfect stitching conditions. In the garden, away from Laura's immediate oversight, Aaliyah began to breathe differently. Her shoulders gradually relaxed. Color touched her cheeks. She'd been banned from outdoor spaces for 6 years. Laura claimed she was too delicate for weather, and the deprivation showed in every aspect of her bearing. Henry visited each afternoon, sitting nearby while she worked, simply talking, not interrogating, not demanding, just offering conversation as if she were a person worthy of his time and attention. "What would you create if you could design anything?" he asked one day. "If there were no restrictions, no clients, no requirements except your own vision?" Aaliyah's hands stilled on the silk. The question was dangerous. No one had ever asked what she wanted. The concept itself felt treasonous. I'm not supposed to want things, Your Grace," she whispered. "But if you could." The silence stretched so long Henry thought she wouldn't answer. Then quietly, "I would embroider a map of all the places I've read about but never seen. gardens and cities and seashores. I'd stitch them as I imagine them, not as they truly are. I'd create a world where girls like me— She stopped abruptly, the thought too treasonous to complete. Where girls like you are free, Henry finished gently. Aaliyah's needle slipped. Blood bloomed on the expensive silk. She gasped in horror, knowing Laura would punish her for ruining such costly fabric. Henry caught her hand gently before she could hide the wound. It's just cloth, Aaliyah. Your safety matters more than any fabric. She stared at him, this powerful man who just declared her well-being more valuable than expensive material, and something cracked in the prison of belief Laura had constructed around her identity. "Why are you being kind to me?" she whispered. "What do you want?" "I want you to remember who you are," Henry said quietly. "I want you to know that Laura Brooks is a liar." The words hung in the air, dangerous, impossible, terrifying. That night, Aaliyah couldn't sleep. She pulled out her secret gallery of embroidered scraps from beneath the loose floorboard and studied them with new eyes in the moonlight. The bird in the cage, the fox escaping, the map of imagined places. Years of hidden signatures, secret rebellions, forbidden hope. What if these aren't adequate technical work, she thought, her hands trembling as she traced the stitches. What if they're art? What if I'm not nothing? The question terrified her more than any punishment Laura had ever devised. Because if she was something, if she'd always been something, then 6 years of cruelty became even more unbearable. 6 years of believing lies. 6 years of erasing herself. But the Duke's words echoed. Laura Brooks is a liar. And for the first time in 6 years, Aaliyah Todd allowed herself to wonder if that might possibly be true. Charlotte Brooks stood at her window, watching the Duke walk in the garden with Aaliyah, and felt something she hadn't experienced in 6 years: shame. If you're still with us on this journey of a young woman discovering her worth after being raised by a hard stepmother to believe she was a nonentity, I'm truly grateful. Would you take just a moment to like this video and subscribe to the Duchess's Secret? It genuinely helps me continue sharing these powerful stories of transformation. Drop a comment letting me know which character resonates with you most. I read every single one. For years, Charlotte had accepted praise for Aaliyah's work without question. Her mother said it was necessary, that Aaliyah was too delicate for society's pressures, too fragile for public attention. Charlotte was doing her a kindness, Laura insisted, by shielding her from expectations she couldn't meet. But watching the Duke kneel beside Aaliyah in the afternoon light, speaking to her as if she mattered, Charlotte saw the truth her mother had disguised. Aaliyah wasn't delicate. She was destroyed. Systematically, deliberately destroyed. And Charlotte had been complicit in that destruction. The realization was devastating. Every gown Charlotte had been praised for, every commission she'd accepted credit for, every moment she'd stood in drawing rooms accepting admiration, all of it built on Aaliyah's invisible labor, Aaliyah's stolen genius, Aaliyah's erased identity. Charlotte pressed her forehead against the cool glass and wept. That evening at dinner, Charlotte's carefully constructed composure finally cracked. "Mother," she said quietly, "why did you tell the Duke that Aaliyah only does basic stitching? You know she designs everything." The dining room fell silent. Laura's face hardened, her knife stilling on her plate. "Don't be foolish, Charlotte. I design, you assist. Aaliyah executes technical work. That is the natural order." "But that's not true." Charlotte's voice shook but held firm. "I've watched her create from nothing. She doesn't execute our designs. She creates her own. and we take credit for them." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Laura's fury was immediate and terrifying. She set down her silverware with precise control. "You ungrateful child! After everything I've done to secure your future, to build your prospects, by stealing Aaliyah's work," Charlotte interrupted. "By starving her, by convincing her she's worthless so she won't realize the truth." "The truth?" Laura's voice rose, years of controlled rage finally erupting. "You want truth, Charlotte? Your father never loved me. Do you understand that? He married me for convenience, so you would have a mother, but he never stopped mourning Aaliyah's mother. Never stopped seeing that woman's face in his daughter. That girl has her mother's beauty, her mother's talent, her mother's ability to make people love her without even trying." Charlotte stared as understanding dawned. "You hate her because father loved her. I hate her because she's everything I can never be." Laura stood abruptly, her composure shattered. "And I will not let her steal what should be ours. Not opportunities, not praise, and certainly not the Duke of Warbstow." The words revealed everything. Not guardianship, but jealous revenge. Not protection, but systematic destruction. 6 years of cruelty, with a motive as simple as it was cruel. Charlotte looked at her mother, truly looked, and saw someone she no longer recognized, or perhaps saw clearly for the first time. She had a choice: continue enabling this cruelty, or choose differently. She chose differently. Charlotte sought out Henry in his guest chambers late that evening, highly improper, but necessary. She brought evidence wrapped in cloth, sketches in Aaliyah's hand showing design concepts, fabric samples with notes in Aaliyah's handwriting, letters from clients praising work they believed Laura had created. "My mother has been lying for 6 years," Charlotte said, her voice shaking as she spread the evidence across his desk. "Everything she's built is stolen from Aaliyah, and I've been helping her do it." Henry studied this young woman who was finally finding courage. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I watched my mother destroy someone for 6 years and did nothing. Because you see Aaliyah as valuable. And maybe if someone powerful enough believes it, she'll start to believe it too." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. "Because I'm tired of being part of something cruel." Henry examined the evidence, damning, comprehensive, undeniable. Combined with what he'd already gathered, it painted a complete picture of fraud and abuse. "What do you propose we do?" he asked. "Expose her, publicly, at Lady Catherine's celebration, in front of witnesses who matter in London society. Make it impossible for my mother to deny the truth." "That will destroy your mother's reputation," Henry said carefully, "and likely yours as well." "I know." Charlotte's voice was steady despite her tears. "But Aaliyah's already been destroyed. The least I can do is help her reclaim what was stolen." They devised a strategy: gather final evidence, secure witnesses, and reveal the truth at the pre-wedding celebration, where society's elite would be assembled. Justice, when it came, would be swift and public. But they needed Aaliyah's cooperation, and that would be the hardest part. Henry found Aaliyah in the garden the next afternoon. She was working on the waistcoat commission, her hands moving with their usual precision despite visible trembling. He sat beside her and spoke directly. "Aaliyah, I know the truth. You create everything Laura claims as her own. You're the artist, you're the genius, and she's been stealing your work, your credit, your identity for 6 years." Aaliyah's needle stilled, color drained from her face. "No, you're wrong. I do what she tells me." I'm a non-entity. You're not, and I can prove it, but I need you to trust me. Why? Tears streamed down her hollow cheeks. Why do you care what happens to me? Henry took her scarred hands gently in his, feeling them tremble. Because I see you, Aaliyah Todd. I see your talent, your strength, your worth. And I cannot walk away knowing you believe the lies Laura has told you. Every instinct screamed at Aaliyah to refuse, to stay invisible, to accept her place as nothing. Safety lay in invisibility. Hope was dangerous. But a small, stubborn part of her, the part that had secretly signed her work AT for 6 years, that had embroidered hidden rebellions on scraps of fabric, that had survived without being entirely conquered, whispered, "What if he's right?" "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I know, but you're also brave. You've survived 6 years of systematic cruelty without losing the ability to create beauty. That's not nothing, Aaliyah. That's extraordinary." The word again, extraordinary, applied to her, to the nothing she'd been told she was. "What would I have to do?" she whispered. "Stand before witnesses and claim your work. Let me present the evidence. Let Charlotte testify. Let the truth be known. And if they don't believe me, if Laura convinces them I'm delusional, that she's been protecting me from my own instability, then I'll use every ounce of influence I possess to ensure they do believe you," Henry said firmly. "But I cannot do this without your consent. This is your choice, Aaliyah. Your decision. Your first truly autonomous choice in 6 years." The weight of it was crushing, but also liberating. Aaliyah looked at their joined hands, his strong and unscarred, hers marked by years of labor. She thought of her father's belief in her, of the hidden signatures she'd been leaving like breadcrumbs for 6 years, of the small rebellions that proved some part of her had refused to surrender completely. "Yes," she whispered, "I'll do it. I'll trust you." That night, Aaliyah sat in the sewing room and did something radical. She embroidered a piece for herself. Not hidden, not secretive, but open and bold. She created a self-portrait in thread, a young woman with hollow eyes but steady hands, surrounded by the beauty she created despite everything. And in the corner, no longer hidden but prominent, she stitched in gold thread, Aaliyah Todd. Her name, her identity, her signature displayed rather than concealed. It was the most terrifying thing she'd ever created. But as she worked through the night, something shifted inside her. Not belief, not yet, but possibility. The faint, fragile suggestion that maybe, just maybe, she was something after all. And that possibility, however terrifying, was enough to keep her needle moving until dawn broke over Thornfield Manor, and the day of reckoning drew closer. 3 days remained until Lady Catherine's celebration. 3 days to gather final evidence, prepare witnesses, and convince Aaliyah she was strong enough to reclaim her identity in front of 200 members of England's elite. Henry moved with military precision, years of diplomatic negotiations serving him well. He'd orchestrated treaties between warring nations. Exposing one woman's cruelty should be considerably simpler. Should be. But the stakes felt higher than any negotiation he'd ever conducted. Mr. Pemberton, the solicitor, prepared detailed affidavits documenting Aaliyah's inheritance and Laura's systematic violations. Mrs. Harrison, the London dress shop owner, agreed to testify about the dramatic transformation in Laura's work 6 years ago. Even Thornfield's servants provided statements about Aaliyah's working conditions, though they trembled with fear of retribution. Henry documented everything, the fabric samples from Laura's locked box, each photographed and catalogued, letters from prestigious clients praising Lady Brooks's extraordinary talent, receipts showing thousands of pounds earned from work that bore Aaliyah's hidden signature. Most damning of all, Henry retrieved pieces Aaliyah had created years ago from various shops and private collections. Each bore the tiny AT signature. Each predated any work Laura claimed to have designed herself. The timeline was irrefutable. The evidence was overwhelming. But evidence alone wouldn't be enough if Aaliyah couldn't stand before witnesses and claim her truth. Meanwhile, Aaliyah was learning to exist differently. Henry insisted she eat proper meals. Her body was dangerously malnourished. The doctor he'd secretly consulted warned. She must sleep adequate hours instead of working until exhaustion. She must spend time outdoors where sunlight and fresh air could begin healing years of deprivation. Each small act of self-care felt like rebellion. Each moment of putting herself first felt fundamentally wrong. "I should be working," she protested when Henry found her in the garden one afternoon, simply sitting in the sun. "You're recovering," he corrected gently. "That's more important than any embroidery." "But I'm being useless." "You're being human, Aaliyah. There's a difference." Slowly, incrementally, she began to remember what it felt like to be a person rather than merely a pair of useful hands. When the gown arrived, Aaliyah stared at it in disbelief. Beautiful blue silk, elegant without ostentation, tailored perfectly to her thin frame. "I can't wear this," she whispered, touching the fabric with trembling fingers. I don't belong in something so fine." "You belong in whatever you choose to wear," Henry said firmly. "But look closer. Do you recognize this embroidery?" Aaliyah examined the delicate work along the hem and bodice. Her breath caught. These were her pieces, work Laura had sold years ago, now retrieved and incorporated into a dress made for her. "Your art, Aaliyah," Henry said quietly. "Worn by you, credited to you, celebrated by you." She touched the embroidery with shaking hands, barely recognizing her own work when it was presented as valuable rather than barely adequate. The roses she'd stitched with such care, now adorning a gown meant for her body, her celebration, her reclamation. It was almost too much to comprehend. Charlotte helped prepare Aaliyah for what was coming, her own guilt driving her to be as helpful as possible. "Mother will be vicious," she warned as they sat together in Aaliyah's small room. "She'll say you're mad, delusional, a liar trying to steal credit. She's very good at making people doubt their own reality." "I know," Aaliyah whispered. "She's been doing it to me for 6 years." "But you have something she doesn't," Henry added, joining them. "You have the truth, you have evidence, and you have witnesses who will validate your reality." As the celebration approached, Aaliyah's anxiety intensified. Years of conditioning screamed that she was nothing, that claiming otherwise was delusional presumption, that she would be exposed as a fraud. 2 nights before the event, the panic overwhelmed her completely. Henry found her curled on the floor of the sewing room, hyperventilating, shaking, gasping for air. "I can't," she sobbed. "I can't stand in front of all those people and claim to be something I'm not." Henry sat beside her on the floor, his presence steady and calm. "You're not claiming to be something you're not. You're claiming to be something you are. That's very different." "But what if Laura is right? What if I'm nothing and this is all delusion?" He pulled out the embroidered handkerchief with the escaping fox, the first piece she'd created for him. "Do you see this? This is the work of someone who understands the human experience so deeply she can capture it in thread. This is the work of an artist who sees the world with profound empathy and extraordinary skill. That person is you, Aaliyah. I'm so scared. I know. But you're not alone anymore. You have me. You have Charlotte. You have the truth. He met her eyes. And when you stand in that ballroom and reclaim your name, we'll all be standing with you. That night, unable to sleep, Aaliyah wrote a letter to herself. Dear Aaliyah, for 6 years, someone told you that you were nothing. You believed her because believing was safer than hoping. But what if you're not nothing? What if you're extraordinary, and you've been extraordinary all along, and the only thing standing between you and freedom is the courage to claim it? Tomorrow, you take that step. Tomorrow, you choose to be seen. I'm so scared, but I'm also ready. Aaliyah Todd. She folded it carefully, placed it in her pocket. Tomorrow, she would carry her own words against Laura's lies. The morning of the celebration arrived cold and bright. Aaliyah dressed in the blue silk gown, her hands shaking so badly Charlotte had to help with the tiny buttons. You look beautiful, Charlotte said quietly, arranging Aaliyah's dark hair in a style that was simple but elegant. And I'm sorry it took me 6 years to say so. Aaliyah met her stepsister's eyes in the mirror. You're saying it now. That matters. Henry arrived to escort them, magnificent in formal black attire. When he saw Aaliyah, something shifted in his expression, recognition, admiration, something deeper that made her breath catch. Ready? He asked, offering his arm. No, Aaliyah admitted honestly, but I'm going anyway. Henry smiled. That's what courage is. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. They climbed into the carriage. Lady Catherine's celebration awaited. 200 witnesses, one moment of truth, and the end of 6 years of invisible suffering. Aaliyah Todd, who had been nothing for so long, touched the letter in her pocket and chose to believe she might be something after all. The carriage wheels turned. The journey began. And there was no turning back. Lady Catherine's pre-wedding celebration glittered with candlelight and society's elite. 200 guests filled the Warbstow Estate's grand ballroom. Aristocrats, artists, merchants, anyone whose opinion mattered in London's intricate social web. Laura Brooks stood at the center of an admiring circle, accepting praise for the magnificent trousseau she'd designed. Her triumph was complete. The Duke's sister wore Laura's work. Society recognized Laura's genius. And somewhere hidden away, Aaliyah remained invisible, exactly as she should be. Except Aaliyah wasn't hidden away. The ballroom doors opened, conversation faltered, heads turning toward the unexpected interruption. Aaliyah Todd stepped inside, wearing the blue silk gown embroidered with her own stolen work, now returned to her. Duke Henry Barlow stood at her right side. Charlotte, having slipped away from Laura moments before, positioned herself at Aaliyah's left. The effect was electric. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Laura went white. Henry raised his hand, calling for attention. The room fell silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on this unexpected drama. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice carried with unmistakable ducal authority. There's been a grave injustice, and it ends tonight. Laura tried to intervene, her voice strained. Your Grace, I don't understand. I believe you do, Henry said coldly. For 6 years, you've presented yourself as a couturière of extraordinary talent. You've accepted commissions, praise, substantial payment for designs you claimed as your own. He pulled out the fabric samples from Laura's locked box, held them high for all to see. These are marked with prices you charged clients, thousands of pounds for work you said was yours. But these pieces, all of them, were created by Aaliyah Todd, the stepdaughter you've kept hidden, starved, and convinced she was worthless. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned toward Laura, whose face had transformed from white to mottled red. That's absurd, Laura sputtered. That girl is merely a servant who does basic stitching. Then explain these, Henry interrupted, producing letters from clients. He read aloud. Lady Brooks's work changed dramatically 6 years ago. The emotional depth, the storytelling quality. It's as if a completely different artist emerged. He looked directly at Laura. 6 years ago, the exact moment you took control of Aaliyah's father's estate. The evidence mounted with devastating precision. Mr. Pemberton stepped forward, documents in hand. Mr. Todd left explicit instructions that his daughter was to be educated, cared for, and launched into society. Lady Brooks violated every stipulation. She isolated the girl, stole her inheritance, and enslaved her to produce work she could sell as her own. Mrs. Harrison, the London dress shop owner, testified next. I commissioned work from Lady Brooks for years. 6 years ago, the quality transformed completely. I asked what had changed. She became defensive, evasive. Now I understand why. She was selling someone else's genius. 3 of Thornfield Manor's servants stepped forward, their voices shaking despite Henry's guarantee of protection. 18-hour workdays, starvation rations, complete isolation, systematic abuse disguised as guardianship. Then Charlotte faced her mother before society, tears streaming down her face. Mother, I'm sorry, but I can't keep lying. I've never designed anything. You've never designed anything. Everything, every piece you've ever sold, every commission you've ever completed was created by Aaliyah. I watched her work until her fingers bled. I accepted praise for her genius. Her voice broke. And I'm ashamed. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. The scandal was complete, the fraud exposed. Laura's composure shattered. Years of controlled cruelty erupted in raw confession. She has her mother's face! The words burst out, ugly and desperate. Everything I did, everything I sacrificed, and he never loved me, never saw me, because he was too busy mourning her. The motivation was exposed before all. Not financial gain, but jealous vengeance against a dead woman, enacted on her innocent daughter. So you destroyed a child, Henry said quietly, because you couldn't accept being second choice. Laura had no answer. Society's judgment was immediate and merciless. Conversation shifted, backs turned, her social death enacted in real time. Henry crossed the ballroom to where Aaliyah stood frozen, overwhelmed. He knelt before her, a duke kneeling before a seamstress, witnessed by England's elite. Aaliyah Todd, he said, loud enough for every witness to hear. You are not a nonentity. You are not worthless. You are not nothing. His voice intensified with absolute conviction. You are an artist of extraordinary talent. You are a woman of remarkable strength who survived 6 years of systematic cruelty without losing the ability to create beauty. You are seen. You are valued. You matter. I don't, Aaliyah whispered, barely able to process. I don't know if I believe it. Then I'll believe it for you, Henry said gently, until you're strong enough to believe it yourself. He turned to the assembled guests. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the true artist, Miss Aaliyah Todd. Every piece you've admired, every design you've praised, every emotional narrative you've been moved by, all of it was created by this woman. For 6 years, Aaliyah had been silent. Now, in front of 200 witnesses, she found her voice. My name is Aaliyah Todd. Soft at first, then stronger. I am not a non-entity. I am an artist. I create because it is my soul made visible. I matter because I exist. She turned to face Laura directly. And you had no right to tell me otherwise. The room erupted in applause. Society had witnessed justice. Henry took Aaliyah's scarred hands, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. Aaliyah Todd, I came to Thornfield Manor seeking a seamstress and found something I didn't know I was looking for. Someone genuine in a world of performance. Someone extraordinary who'd been told she was nothing. He pulled out a ring, simple gold with a small emerald. I'm not asking you to marry me tonight. You've been controlled for 6 years. I won't add to that by demanding an immediate answer. But I want you to know, I see you, I value you, I choose you. He slipped the ring onto her finger. When you're ready, if you're ready, I'll be waiting. Tears streamed down Aaliyah's face. I'm not nothing, she whispered. Never, Henry said fiercely. You were never nothing, and I'll spend my life proving it to you if you'll let me. Years of abuse, starvation, and psychological destruction finally overwhelmed her body. Aaliyah collapsed into Henry's arms as consciousness fled. But before darkness claimed her, she whispered, Yes. Aaliyah Todd, who had been erased for 6 years, fainted in a duke's arms before 200 witnesses who would carry the story through every drawing room in England. Laura Brooks's fraud was exposed. Her cruelty was public, her power was broken, and Charlotte wept for the sister she'd failed, for the years wasted, for finally choosing courage. Justice, when it came, was swift and absolute. Aaliyah woke 3 days later in a room filled with sunlight. So much sunlight she had to shield her eyes. Her body felt heavy, her mind foggy, but the bed was soft, the blankets warm, and someone was holding her hand. Henry sat beside the bed, looking exhausted but relieved. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, suggesting he'd barely slept. Welcome back, he said gently, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. How long? Aaliyah's voice emerged as a rasp. 3 days. You've been in and out of consciousness, but the doctors say you'll recover fully with rest and proper nutrition. The doctors had been frank with Henry. Years of malnutrition, overwork, and psychological abuse had taken a profound toll. Aaliyah's body had finally collapsed under the weight of survival, but she was safe now, in Henry's London household, surrounded by people who valued her, with physicians who treated her as a patient deserving care rather than a burden. As strength returned, Aaliyah had to process what had happened. The memories came in fragments: the ballroom, the witnesses, Laura's confession, Henry's proposal, the applause that had sounded like thunder. Did I dream it? She asked Charlotte, who visited daily with books and quiet companionship. Did you really testify against your mother? I did, Charlotte said quietly, her hands twisting in her lap. I should have done it years ago. I'm sorry, Aaliyah. For everything. The sisters' relationship was complicated. Years of Laura's manipulation couldn't be undone overnight. Trust had to be rebuilt slowly, carefully, like embroidering over damaged fabric. But they were trying, learning to see each other as allies rather than competitors for scraps of approval. You did it when it mattered, Aaliyah said finally. That counts for something. The aftermath for Laura was brutal. Society turned on her with the viciousness it reserved for those who committed unforgivable sins. Fraud was one thing. Abusing a child in one's care was unthinkable. No one would commission her work. Former friends cut all ties. She was politely but firmly asked to leave London. The inheritance she'd stolen was returned to Aaliyah through legal channels. She even faced potential criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. Laura retreated to a small cottage in the countryside, isolated and ruined, precisely the fate she'd intended for Aaliyah. Charlotte chose not to follow her mother. "I can't," she told Aaliyah one afternoon. "I can't enable her anymore. I can't be part of that cruelty." "She's still your mother," Aaliyah said quietly. "And you're still my sister. I'm choosing differently this time." Mr. Pemberton worked with Henry to restore everything Laura had stolen. The inheritance was substantial, enough to ensure Aaliyah's independence for life. Her legal rights were restored. She was no longer under guardianship, no longer legally bound to anyone's control. She was, for the first time in 6 years, free. But freedom was terrifying. After years of being told what to do, when to work, how to exist, Aaliyah didn't know how to make choices for herself. Every decision felt impossible, laden with the weight of potential wrongness. "What would you like for breakfast, miss?" a maid asked one morning. Aaliyah stared at her, panic rising. I I don't know. What should I want?" "Whatever you'd like. You're allowed to choose." Such a simple concept, such an impossible question. Henry understood the healing would be long and non-linear. He didn't push for answers about marriage. He simply spent time with Aaliyah, helping her rediscover who she was beneath the abuse. "What makes you happy?" he asked one afternoon as they sat in the garden, warm summer sun filtering through the trees. "I don't know," Aaliyah admitted. "I've been so focused on surviving. I forgot what happiness feels like." "Then we'll discover it together," Henry said simply. "No rush, no pressure, just living." Slowly, Aaliyah began creating again, but differently. Not fulfilling commissions, not hiding her work, but creating for herself. She started the embroidered map she'd told Henry about. All the places she'd read about but never seen. Gardens and cities and seashores, stitched as she imagined them rather than as they truly were. It took weeks, working at her own pace, resting when tired, eating proper meals, sleeping full nights, revolutionary acts of self-care that still felt strange, almost wrong. When she finished, she showed it to Henry with trembling hands. "It's extraordinary," he said quietly, studying the intricate work. "But what's this?" He pointed to a small figure embroidered at the map's center, a woman with needle and thread, creating the world around her. "That's me," Aaliyah said. "The person who creates the reality she wants, rather than accepting the one imposed on her." Henry's eyes held something deep and warm. "You're learning to be free." "I'm learning to try," she corrected. "Some days I still hear Laura's voice telling me I'm nothing. Some days I believe it. And other days? Other days I believe you instead." 3 months after the public revelation, Aaliyah stood in the garden, embroidering a piece just because she wanted to. No client, no deadline, no fear. Just creation for its own sake. Henry found her there, working in the golden afternoon light that made her dark hair shine with copper undertones. "I have something to tell you," she said, setting down her needle with hands that no longer trembled constantly. "I've been thinking about your proposal." Henry went very still. "And? I'm not ready yet. I need more time to learn who I am outside of being nothing." She met his eyes directly, something she'd been practicing. "But I want you to know, I'm choosing to try. I'm choosing to believe I might be worthy of love. I'm choosing you, but I need to choose myself first." Henry smiled, relief and respect evident in his expression. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. He meant it. Aaliyah could see it in his face, hear it in his voice. He would wait, not because she was a project to be completed, but because she was a person worth waiting for. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. You're learning to see yourself now, Henry said gently. That's what matters. Aaliyah Todd, who had been nothing for 6 years, was learning to be something, and that journey, she was discovering, was more revolutionary than any public vindication could ever be. The afternoon light caught the gold thread in her embroidery, her signature, no longer hidden but proudly displayed. Aaliyah Todd, it read, her name, her identity, her choice. And for the first time in 6 years, she believed it might actually mean something. 6 months after the public revelation, the Royal Academy announced an unprecedented exhibition, The Hidden Artist, 6 Years of Aaliyah Todd. Every piece she'd created, properly attributed, properly celebrated. Her genius, no longer hidden, displayed for all London to see. We're near the end of this remarkable tale of a woman raised to believe she was nothing, until the most desired duke in England showed her the truth. If Aaliyah's transformation from invisible seamstress to celebrated artist has moved you, would you honor me with a like and subscription to the Duchess's Secret? Your support means the world and helps me bring you more stories of courage and redemption. Please share in the comments what this story meant to you. Organizing the exhibition was overwhelming. Aaliyah worked with curators to gather pieces scattered across the city. Work Laura had sold, embroidery hidden in shops, pieces owned by private collectors who'd unknowingly purchased stolen art. Each recovered piece felt like reclaiming a stolen part of herself. I can't believe I created all this, she whispered, standing in the gallery as curators hung her work on cream-colored walls. Why not? Henry asked gently. You saw your hands create each piece. Because I was told for so long it wasn't art, just adequate technical work. Seeing it displayed like this, her voice failed. As the opening approached, Aaliyah's anxiety intensified. Years of conditioning screamed that she was fraudulent, that claiming artistry was presumptuous, that she would be exposed as nothing. The night before the opening, panic overwhelmed her completely. Henry found her curled in the corner of the gallery, hyperventilating, gasping for air. I can't, she sobbed. What if they're all wrong? What if Laura was right and everyone else is just being kind? Henry knelt beside her, pulling out letters he'd collected. These are from strangers who bought your work years ago, before anyone knew your name. This widow wrote that your embroidery of a garden made her weep because it reminded her of hope. This merchant said your work helped him through grief. He met her eyes. These people were moved by your art when it had no name attached, when there was no social pressure to praise it. Your art has power, Aaliyah. That's not kindness or delusion, that's truth. The exhibition opened to hundreds, society members, art critics, collectors, and those whose opinions shaped London's cultural landscape. Aaliyah stood in the corner, wearing a gown she'd embroidered herself, an act of reclamation, fighting the urge to flee. Henry remained at her side, steady as stone. Lord Ashford, London's most respected art critic, arrived first. He studied each piece with careful attention, making notes, his stern face unreadable. Aaliyah's heart hammered. If Ashford declared her work mediocre, the exhibition would fail. If he exposed her as fraudulent. After 30 minutes, Ashford approached her directly. Miss Todd, I have been reviewing art for 30 years. I have seen thousands of pieces by hundreds of artists. He paused. Your work is extraordinary. Aaliyah's breath stopped. The technical mastery is evident, Ashford continued, But more than that, the emotional narrative, the psychological depth, the ability to capture the human experience in thread. This is not merely craftsmanship. This is genuine artistry of the highest order. He turned to address the gathered crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, we are witnessing the emergence of a significant artistic talent. Miss Todd's work deserves to be studied, collected, and celebrated. She is not just competent, she is exceptional. The room erupted in applause. What followed was overwhelming. Collectors approached with commission offers. Other galleries requested pieces for their exhibitions. Art students asked to study her technique. Society members who'd witnessed her public vindication praised her courage. Aaliyah stood in the center of this celebration, barely able to process it. 6 months ago, she'd been nothing. Today, she was being celebrated as an artistic genius. The success was too much. She fled to the gallery's small garden, fighting to breathe. Henry found her on a bench, tears streaming down her face. "I should be happy," she gasped. "Why aren't I happy?" "Because for 6 years, you learned that good things are followed by punishment," Henry said quietly, sitting beside her. "You're waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to expose you as fraudulent, for this to be revealed as a cruel joke." "Yes," she whispered, "exactly that. But it's not a joke. It's real. Your talent is real. The praise is genuine, and you're allowed to accept it without waiting for disaster." Aaliyah had created one piece specifically for this exhibition, kept covered until now. With Henry beside her, she unveiled it. The gasps were audible. A self-portrait, embroidered with extraordinary detail. Aaliyah at a table, creating. But the image was split. One side showed her hollow, starved, working in darkness with Laura's shadow looming. The other side showed her in color and light, creating freely, with Henry's presence suggested in golden thread. The caption read, "Before and after, the cost of being nothing, the freedom of being something." It was raw, honest, unflinching. It showed trauma without hiding it, healing without pretending completion. "This is my truth," Aaliyah said quietly to the gathered crowd. "I was destroyed. I believed I was nothing, and I'm still learning to believe differently. But I'm trying, and maybe that's enough." People wept. Critics called it the most powerful piece in the exhibition. That evening, after the crowds dispersed, Aaliyah and Henry remained alone in the gallery. "Do you remember what I asked you 6 months ago?" Henry said quietly. "You asked me to consider marrying you. Are you ready now?" Aaliyah looked around the gallery, at her work, properly attributed, properly celebrated, at evidence that she was not nothing, had never been nothing, was in fact extraordinary. "I'm not completely healed," she said honestly. "I still have days when I hear Laura's voice. I still struggle to believe I'm worthy of this, of success, of love, of you." "I'm not asking for completely healed," Henry said. "I'm asking if you're willing to keep healing with me beside you, if you're willing to let me love you while you learn to love yourself." Aaliyah thought of the embroidered map, the self-portrait, the 6 months spent learning to exist as something rather than nothing. "Yes," she said, clear and certain. "Yes, Henry, I choose you. I choose us. I choose me." The kiss sealed a promise. Not that healing would be complete or easy, but that she wouldn't face it alone. 1 year later, the Duke and Duchess of Warpstow stood in their home's gallery, a room dedicated to Aaliyah's work. "Do you ever hear Laura's voice anymore?" Henry asked as she worked. "Sometimes," Aaliyah admitted. "But now I have other voices to balance it. Yours, Charlotte's, my father's from his letters. My own. And what does your voice say? She set down her needle. It says I'm learning. That being nothing for 6 years doesn't mean I'm nothing forever. That I'm worthy of love, of success, of taking up space. She smiled. That I'm Aaliyah Todd, artist, duchess, woman who survived. That I matter because I exist. And do you believe it? Most days, she said honestly. And on the days I don't, I choose to act as if I do, until belief catches up with choice. Aaliyah Todd had been raised to believe she was a nonentity, but she'd learned the truth. She was never nothing. She was always extraordinary. She just needed to remind herself, every single day, until the lie couldn't touch her anymore. Tell me again, she whispered. You are Aaliyah Todd, Henry said, as he would every day for the rest of their lives. And you are extraordinary, only you, always you. And finally she knew it was true.